News, the only way to know the worldly happenings. Elders love it, youngsters are bored of it, and kids feel scared. Through years, it took diverse medium. One almost spends 3 to 5 years of his lifetime reading worldly news from several different news mediums. Now, the world is transforming into a digitally empowered society, and people are moving away from the traditional printed newspapers to digital news on the smartphones. This led to our research, a comparison between carbon footprint of printed newspapers and digital news on the smartphones. To begin with the details about this research, we need to first understand what carbon footprint is.
You might have heard about carbon footprint a lot of time, but let me tell you what it actually means. Carbon footprint is a measure of the direct and indirect greenhouse gas emissions associated with all the activities in the product's complete life cycle. A product can be individual, an event, an organization, or a service. Every activity or product has a carbon footprint. Doing a laundry also releases 2.4 kg carbon dioxide equivalent. Our dependency on the internet does not come carbon free at all. At an individual level, it may be low, but if we add global internet surfing data per year, which includes web pages, databases, and applications and downloads, we will have a total carbon footprint of 490 million tons of carbon dioxide. Isn't that shocking? To calculate the carbon footprint of newspapers and smartphones, we have used a technique called life cycle assessment. Life cycle assessment evaluates the environmental impact of all the stages of the product, right from mining and processing of raw materials, production, transportation and distribution, use and reuse, and finally, end of life.
Various studies have shown that online sources dominate the news viewership medium in younger people, while offline sources such as print, television, and radio still is the dominant medium in older people. We have selected India for our scope of study as it has recently undergone a Digital India transformation project that highlights the use of smartphones and other digital devices. We obtained the number of printed newspapers and journals throughout the country and realized these numbers to be falling year on year drastically with an average of 8.4%. Then we analyzed the user trend on digital devices. Nowadays, 92% of people use smartphone to access internet and spend an average of nearly 210 minutes per day on smartphones, out of which approximately 193 minutes are spent just to stay updated with the news. Apps, website, and social media are the main sources of viewing news on smartphone. 32% of users on social media connect daily just to stay updated with news. This has set the basis of our study. We compared the carbon footprint of newspaper with the carbon footprint of digital news on smartphone from the sources of web, app, and social media.
Let us now show you how we calculated the carbon footprint of newspapers and smartphones. We have used large and extensive data set compiled over many years with important contributions from key industries in newspaper and smartphones. We derive the cradle to grave carbon footprint per newspaper as 0.533 kg CO2 equivalent. By cradle and grave, we mean that carbon footprint of all the life cycle stages of a newspaper from fiber supply to direct emissions from pulp and paper to the end of the life. We have used the total number of printed newspaper distributed in the country to obtain the yearly total carbon footprint. To calculate the carbon footprint of smartphones, two important events in the life cycle of the smartphone are considered. The first one is manufacturing, which contributes 45 kg CO2 equivalent. And the second one is operations, which contribute 0.0361 gram CO2 equivalent per minute of usage. The total carbon footprint of a smartphone per minute is obtained by adding the footprint from the manufacturing and the operational processes of the smartphone. To view news on a smartphone, news readers use two means: web and applications and social media. We calculated the carbon footprint of both these two means of news in a smartphone and then added them to obtain the total carbon footprint of a smartphone while viewing news using the total carbon footprint of a smartphone per minute, along with average time spent to view news on smartphone. We have calculated the carbon footprint of a smartphone while viewing news on web and application. Using the total carbon footprint of a smartphone per minute along with average time spent to view news on social media and the total smartphone units sold, we have calculated the carbon footprint of a smartphone while viewing news on social media.
Let us now analyze the results of our research. The graph here shows the carbon footprint of printed newspapers and smartphones while viewing news from 2015 to 2020. We have forecasted the values till 2025. Let us analyze the red line first, which is the carbon footprint of smartphones while viewing news on web and apps. The carbon footprint increased by 13% from 2015 to 2016 and is continuously increasing thereafter. We can attribute the carbon footprint increase to the increase in the average time spent by a user to view news on a smartphone and to the increase in the digital news readers. The green line, which is the carbon footprint of smartphones while viewing news on social media, has a 12% increase from 2015 to 2016 and then by a 38% from 2018 to 2019, which is a threefold increase to the 2015-16 levels. The continuous increase in carbon footprint can be attributed to the increase in smartphones sold per year and to the increase in social media usage per user. The yellow line shows the carbon footprint of printed newspapers. On an average, there is an 8% decrease, which can be attributed to the decreasing circulation of registered printed newspapers and journals in India. In a nutshell, we can say there is a continuous increase in the carbon footprint of smartphones for viewing news, while there is a continuous decrease in the carbon footprint of printed newspaper. It appears that the digital world is going to take up on the world for reading news in future. Many previous studies have focused on harmful effects of printed newspaper and paper industry. People often think that the environmental impact of newspapers would be more in comparison to viewing news online, considering that newspapers involve cutting trees. However, our study concludes that the carbon footprint contribution would be much more if we replace the newspaper industry with the digital news industry. We hope that our study makes a considerable difference and people start to understand the harmful impacts of digital news over printed newspaper. Thank you.